Thank you. Thank you. And it is good being back with you guys, even though it is via Zoom. And seeing your smiling faces there kind of puts me back to standing in your sanctuary up there in Santa Rosa. And Margie and I are holding you guys in prayer, knowing you're in that area with wildfires. We're blessed, but we're down here in the middle of Sacramento, so our threat is not that great, but we know our friends and families are out there, so we hold everyone in prayer, particularly those firefighters too, to be out there fighting these blazes. Well, the title of my talk today is called Take Up Your Bed and Walk. And those are words that are attributed to Jesus of Nazareth, the writer of the Gospel of John. And this lesson comes from a book that Myrtle Fillmore, it's based on Myrtle Fillmore's thing. It's called How to Let God Help You. And, I would suggest, having one of these Unity Classic books by your bedside and reading, a chapter or so before bed, it kind of puts you in a nice frame of mind for your sleeping. And this is a nice little book. It's got 37 chapters. Some of them are just a couple pages. And today's lesson is based on chapter 20, which is called Creatures of Habit. It's only like a page and a half long. But Myrtle talks about overcoming negative ideas that have formed in our consciousness. And she alludes to the healing of the paralytic man by the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem as the key to our overcoming. Came across a story of a young mom who walked in and found her 4-year-old son crying as he was tying his shoes. And the mom says, "Son, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" He said, "Because I have to tie my shoes." And she says to him, "Well, honey, you just learned that it's not that hard, is it?" And the young man says, "No, but I have to do this for the rest of my life." So I'm thinking sometimes, that's our power of imagination can kind of run down the road and looking at all the negative things that can happen. I had a counselor buddy I was talking with, and he says, "Bob, you are a catastrophizer." And that's for sure. If something happens in the world or in my life, I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I'm running down." We weren't getting our refund from the IRS, even though we had filed electronically well before the date. And it wasn't coming. I said, "Oh my God, they're going to audit us. They're going to find all the stuff wrong." Well, it just so happens we were one of the 4.6 million people that they didn't get to process it. And sure enough, it showed up. But I was already running down the road of auditing and all this other stuff. So, and I think some of us can relate to that. When things happen, we look at the negative. And I think that's a little bit about our early programming from our ancestors too. Our little Neanderthal people that walked out of the cave, they weren't thinking of all the good stuff. They were thinking, "Oh my God, what could happen when we're searching for this? Could the saber-toothed tiger be out again? Who knows?" So we're kind of programmed to looking for stuff. And, it can become a habit. And this theme of Myrtle's and this Creatures of Habit in chapter 20 of her book, she starts off with a good quote. She says, "The body is a creature of habit. Without the positive, purposeful, daily effort of the mind, it becomes, after a time, difficult to break the habits into which it has plunged." And as I was reading this chapter, I was remembering a NPR interview by a gentleman named Charles Duhigg that I had heard about. So I had gotten the transcript of it, I had on my computer, so I called that up and was refreshing myself on habits. And in this interview on NPR, Charles Duhigg, he's an investigative reporter for the New York Times, and he had written a book called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and in Business. And he had interviewed all these scientific people about habits and how they develop. And he learned that the habit is composed of 3 different things that the scientists say. They call them habit loops. First of all, there's the cue, and then there's the routine, and then there's the reward. And he kind of put this into practice. He was finding himself that every day at 3 o'clock, he looks at the clock, and he would go up to the cafeteria, get a cookie, and talk with his buddies and stuff. And you're thinking, okay, so 3 o'clock, that's the cue. The routine is I go up and get this cookie, and the reward is the cookie. And you're thinking, well, my pants are getting a little snug. Maybe I need to cut this cookie thing out. So he started looking at it, and what he found that, the cue was 3 o'clock, and the routine was go up to the cafeteria, but he would look and talk to his fellow workers. So the cookie was kind of a byproduct. So at 3 o'clock, rather than going up to the cafeteria, he got up and started talking to his people around him. So he cut out the cookie of the stuff. He found a new routine to do this. And also in this interview, he found that, our habits come from an area of the brain called basal ganglia, the animal brain. And it's the part of our brain that's concerned with emotion, memory, and pattern recognition. Emotion, pattern recognition, and memory. And it's kind of a good thing. I mean, if we had to think through every little act, imagine getting in your car and having to open the door, and then I sitting here, I push the start button. I was thinking about kids today, they're probably wondering what's a key for, and there's a start button now. And doing all these little things. So it kind of sets this pattern up so we can kind of do it on automation. That way it gives our brain a little space to think about other stuff, which is good. But, we can set up things in our life and these habits that are kind of detrimental to us. And Dewey had found that, from these interviews, that one of the easiest way to change our patterns is go on vacation. Because on vacation, everything is different. We don't have the same cues in our life. So, and if we go for like 21 days, nice long vacation, we can change stuff. So if you want to change some stuff, go on vacation. And Dewey pointed out that scientists says we brush our teeth differently, we put on our shoes differently when we're on vacation. So companies are very good at understanding our habits, and they use it in marketing. And when I was preparing this talk, I opened our laundry cabinet, and we had a bottle of Febreze in there. And I remember in this article about Dewey commenting that when Febreze first came out, Procter & Gamble thought, well, their market, everybody wants to get rid of bad smells. And that's how they market it. Well, it was a flop because people that have odors in their house weren't thinking about that. I seen on TV, they changed it. You want your home fresh and clean smelling, use Febreze. So they changed their approach. And there are times in our life where things are up for grab in our habits. There was a study in 1980 that they discovered when people buy a home or move homes, they tend to change their brand of coffee. And people that are getting divorced, they're more likely to start buying a new brand of beer. And, not that they would notice that because, people then moving in a new house and setting it up, they're not really tuning in about the coffee they're buying, or people get divorced, they're not really tuning in about the beer they're buying because they're so concerned with the event that's happening in their lives. So other companies are really tuning into our habits, our buying habits, and Target is one of them that Dewey mentioned. They gather megadata bytes of what we're doing when we're shopping, particularly if you lose their little Target card. You get 5% off, but you're also telling Target all the stuff you're buying and when you're buying it. And they were particularly interested in marketing to pregnant women because in pregnancy, it's one of our unique moments in our lives that habits become unusually flexible. And, it's hard to convince people to change their habits, their buying habits. So one of the analysts in Target realized that when women start buying unscented lotion in larger quantities, they're probably pregnant. And also, if they start buying supplements like zinc and manganese, they were probably in their second trimester of pregnancy. And they had a way of testing it because they had a baby registry. So they knew people that were pregnant and they knew their due date. So as they start analyzing this, they could tailor their marketing based upon these buying habits of these women. Well, one day an irate father shows up in his local Target store wanting to speak to the manager. And he was really upset that his daughter was receiving all these ads for pregnancy stuff. And he's a young teenager. And he's saying, well, are you encouraging my daughter to engage in sex or whatever? And the manager was very apologetic, trying to do his best to calm the man. And the guy left. Well, a few days later, the manager figured, well, I'm going to give this guy a call just to see if I can soothe his ire rather, and get him back as a customer. So he calls him up and he says, I mean to apologize again, sir. And the man says, well, it's me that needs to do the apologizing because we had a little long talk at the family here, and it turns out my daughter's due in a few months and I didn't know about it. So here it is, a major department store thing, knowing what's happening in this guy's house before he did, because they tuned into the habits. So habits. Myrtle goes on talking about habits, and she said, in the mind, there is some negative idea concerning life, which has resulted in the soul's giving up and allowing the body to slump and refuse to do the things for which it had been formed and sustained. So she's saying, there's some negative things can get in there and can really affect our body and how we're doing stuff. And then she goes on to the fact, saying, the very fact that individuals have stayed alive through years of lying in bed is proof that a certain amount of life and substance of God has been received and appropriated for the body. But when the body sets up fixed, negative, limited habits, it stays in bed and fails to use the perfect Christ pattern for its renewal and action. So Myrtle's saying, hey, by the very fact that we're alive and doing stuff, we've appropriated some of the substance of God and we're going forth. But as we do these negative things, they kind of get crystallized and we limit ourselves. And I think right there, she's alluding to this story in the Gospel of John, chapter 5, the first 15 verses. And it's a story about Jesus healing the paralytic man at the pool of Bethesda, which was in Jerusalem. Now, in a nutshell, Jesus shows up in Jerusalem and he is at the pool of Bethesda. And this is a pool that's located right by the sheep gate in Jerusalem. There's 5 gates in Jerusalem where they come in. And this particular pool is supported by 5 colonnades, 5 columns over this covering. And the story about this pool, the mythical story of it is, at some seasons, and the angel of the Lord comes in, stirs the water, and the first person to get into the water gets healed. So there was a host of the blind, the lame, the sick, and so laying around this pool, waiting for the water to be stirred, and then getting in and get healed. Well, Jesus comes up to this one man who's laying on his bed, his mats, and this guy had been there 38 years. That's a long time. And Jesus says to him, do you want to be healed? On almost all the healing miracles of Jesus, he always asks that, do you want to be healed? And it's important about somebody's mindset. Well, the guy doesn't say yes. He kind of gives an excuse. He says, well, sir, while I'm laying here and the angel stirs, somebody else gets into the pool ahead of me. He's got his little, I can't do this, because he's set up this negative state in himself. So Jesus says to him, take up your bed and walk. And he does. He stands up, takes up his bed, his bedding, and goes on. And he goes into the temple. And the story continues that the Jews, and the Greek word there used for the Jews means like the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, or whatever, the ruling people of the Jewish faith there. And they cornered this guy and wants to know who healed you, what, because they know this guy has been at the pool for years. And the guy says, I don't know. So he did not know that it was Jesus of Nazareth, this itinerant healer from Galilee, who showed up there. And turns out Jesus shows up in the temple too. And he finds the guy and he says, hey, go and sin no more. So sin no more. Don't engage in any negative or error thinking. So that's the story in a nutshell about what's happening in the healing of pool of Bethesda. And one of the unique tools that we have in Unity is looking at these stories metaphysically. how does each one of those things represent some part of my consciousness? And if you really, this is the one thing that caught my attention when I showed up in Unity, because my first Unity minister, Reverend Larry Schelling, where I'm sitting in Unity Church in Modesto, and he's going to use this Bible story. And I'd been in this fundamentalist church. I said, I know that story. I know exactly what it means. And then Larry tells the story, and he uses metaphysical interpretation. It's something entirely different. I went, oh my God. And in metaphysically interpreting a story, we look beyond the physical, what those persons, places, and things and actions mean in our consciousness. How do they represent? So this takes place in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's up on a hill. So it's surrounded. You have to go up on a hill. Any way you come, you have to go up to Jerusalem. So if we're going into Jerusalem, we're going up in our consciousness. And this is by the sheep gate, and sheep are innocent creatures. So we go into our thing with very innocent thoughts. And this guy is by the pool of Bethesda, and he's a man. So men usually represent our thinking nature. So we've been hanging around this pool for a long time, 38 years, and it's supported by 5 columns. So this guy's been hanging out in materialism. So I've been hanging out in materialism for a long time, and it's kind of put me in a fixed rut, and I can't get out of there. But the Christ nature in me shows up, and it says, hey, man, you want to change? And of course, I can't admit that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to. So I said, well, it's their fault. If only somebody had helped me to get there, it would be there. And the Christ nature in me kind of speaks out and says, hey, take up your bed and walk. So take up that bed. Get out of your comfort zone, Bob. So I take up my bed and walk, and I head over to the temple. And as I'm looking at the temple, I may be revisiting some embedded theology that we have. And it may be saying, who are you to think that you're healed and go on forward? And that Christ nature appears again and says, hey, stop that error thinking, get moving. So in a nutshell, that's what that story means to me. And, if you're interested in metaphysical interpretation, if you get on truthunity.net, you can actually, I think there's a Fillmore Bible, or there's a Bible that truthunity.net's got there. And it would have the references right to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and the Revealing Word, what these things can mean. So you look at these things, see what they mean, take them into your silence and say, all right, Spirit, what does that mean to me today? Now, I could do that story next week and probably get a different interpretation. So Myrtle kind of refers to that with the take up your bed and walk quote. And she goes on to say, those who are transformed will arise and take up their beds and walk. They will begin to glorify God in doing the things that are well-pleasing in His sight. They will know that life is eternal and inexhaustible. Wow. So as we do this shift in our negative thinking, we get some ways of glorifying God. And I was thinking about glorifying God. And in that story, Jesus says, take up your bed and walk. He was, the Spirit of God is speaking. He's using powerful words. And he's talking about bed. We spend a lot of time in bed. We spend about 1/3 of our 24 hours in bed. And sometimes we wake up in the morning and we think, I really don't want to get out of this comfortable place, but we need to do it. And in Myrtle's book, she says, through the right use of God-given power, a person may make his life the very thing he wants most. Let me say that again. Through the right use of God-given power, a person may make his life the very thing he wants most. And as I was reading through that, Myrtle's saying, the right use of power. So guess what? It kind of implies that there's a wrong use of power. And I've heard a quote attributed to Henry Ford saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. So our thoughts are powerful, powerful tools. And some other tools we have in our unity are prayer and meditation. Prayer is talking to God, meditation is listening to God. And during our times of prayer and meditation, thoughts can come to us. And at the risk of stealing some of Margie's thunder in a future talk of hers, about a week or so ago, Margie had asked me when I was going to Home Depot to see if I could get some foam. She's taking an art class through Sacramento City College via Zoom on ceramics. And she has taken several ceramics classes, and she wanted this foam. Well, she didn't explain what kind of foam she wanted. And I brought home a thick block of foam, and that's not it. Just, no, I need cushy foam, because if I make an object with clay and I set it on something solid, it'll melt down. But if you wrap it in foam, it holds the shape, and then it'll dry, and then you can fire it and glaze it and do all the other stuff. So she was thinking about that. And I went to Home Depot again, looked, they didn't have it. And one day in her meditation, it was on a Wednesday, which is our trash day, and in her meditation, she thought, well, maybe somebody will throw out a roll of foam. So she goes out walking every day for about 20 minutes or so, a spiritual walk. And one day she decided to go down this one particular street. Guess what? Somebody had thrown out a roll of that bedroom foam that goes on your mattress. I was coming home, and she's walking around the side of the house, and she's got this big roll of foam, and she says, look what I found. But in her quiet time, she had this idea of going down the street on her walk and finding this stuff. So I think that's the way spirit works. I mean, we're interconnected by our thoughts and beings. Even though you're sitting up there in your homes, I'm down here in Sacramento, we are connected by spirit. And speaking these words, we have a God-given power of our words. There was a experiment that was done, scientific experiment, where they put metal shavings on a thin piece of metal. And they played a certain musical note. And when they did, these iron filings aligned themselves like a snowflake. They played another musical note, and it aligned themselves in a star pattern. So if these iron filings can respond to that vibration of a musical note, our world can respond to the vibrations of our voice going out there into the world. The ancient yogis have the term mantra. Mantra means power or protection. So it's kind of a good thing. But if we have thought or spoke in a certain way, thinking about lack or limitation or whatever for a long time, we've kind of locked ourselves up in that. Just like that guy at the pool in Bethesda. He was thinking of a certain way that he couldn't get there, and he was stuck on his bed there, and he couldn't get moving. So I think as we speak during the day, watch our thinking, watch our speaking. We can ask ourselves several things. Is it positive? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Before you speak. Is it positive? Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary before we speak today? So in that first quote of Myrtle, she's talking about daily watching our thoughts. So as we daily sow new thoughts, new words, we create new habits, they change new character, and we can move on. And I was reflecting a little bit on our world today. On Sunday morning, I always read the headlines of the newspaper, see what's going on. And we have got a lot going on in our world today. We got this coronavirus pandemic. We've got these protests and stuff going on in our world. We've got all the stuff that's coming up. And so what do we do? This past week, I was reading through my, I have a devotional science of mine, along with my daily word and some other stuff. And on this one page, it had two quotes that were kind of disparative. One was a 14th century Japanese saying, all tempests, like storms, has, like a navel, a hole in its middle through which a gull can fly in silence. All tempest has, like a navel, a hole in the middle through which a gull can fly in silence. And on the same page was a quote by Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science. And Ernest had written, the universe is an orderly system of intelligence, and we exist as ordinary spiritual beings. The universe is an ordinary system of intelligence, and we exist in it as ordinary spiritual beings. Wow. So how do we reconcile it? There's chaos, but there's a hole we can fly through, and the universe is an ordinary thing. I was reflecting a bit a long time ago. I was a Coast Guard officer, and I was on the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton. It was what was called a high endurance cutter, and we're stationed out of Boston, Massachusetts. And we would go out to the middle of the North Atlantic for 8 weeks at a time, and we would do weather balloon cast, we'd do oceanographic cast, send the data back so they could analyze the weather and so on, and also be available for people that were in trouble out there in the middle of the North Atlantic. Well, on one patrol, we were down south. I think we were off the Virginia Capes, and we were coming home towards Boston, and we were involved in what was called, like other people called it, a hurricane. By definition, hurricanes are spawned in the tropics and then they move north. Well, this was a storm that was spawned above the tropics, but it's still the same intensity as a hurricane. And we spent several days steaming towards Florida rather than Boston to get home because we had to ride out this storm. And there was one I had to watch, and it must have been either morning or afternoon watch because I remember it was kind of light. It wasn't dark, so it was kind of light, but we're in the storm. And the winds were blowing 60, 70 knots from the starboard side. And the decks were secured. You couldn't go out on the weather decks because if you went over the side, there'd be no chance of finding you. We couldn't come back and get you. So you couldn't go outside the ship. So we're steaming on along, and all of a sudden, these two, well, we used to call them weather birds, the weather service sends two weather meteorologists with us on each patrol, and they launch these balloons and record all the data and send it back. And these guys come running up in the bridge, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Brach, you're going to be going through the eye of the storm, the eye of the hurricane, in a few minutes." They had been down watching on the radar and down in Combat Information Center, and we were going to be going through it. So sure enough, within a few minutes, boom, the tempest had stopped. It got all quiet. The sea was fairly calm, and you could look around the horizon and see all these dark storm clouds, but it was eerily quiet. You know, a few minutes, about a minute or so later, the captain is up on the bridge going, "Mr. Brach, what's up?" I said, "Captain, we're in the eye of the storm. So, and we're going to be in there for a while to steam through it, because it was a big eye." And I think we unsecured the weather deck so that people look out and see this really phenomenon being inside the eye of a hurricane or hurricane. And, you know, as we got close to the end, you know, we secured the weather decks again. And the weather guy says, "Hey, Mr. Brach, you better close that port bridge wing door and open up the starboard one because that wind is going to shift 180 degrees around and come whipping through here." Well, my quartermaster of the watch was a little slow in doing it, and all of a sudden, the wind comes whipping through this port bridge wing door, charts and stuff flying all over. We finally got it secure. Now the wind is blowing 60, 70 knots from the left side of the boat. So fast forward into ministerial school, and that image came to mind. Reverend Dr. Gary Simmons has written a book called The Eye of the Storm, Embracing Conflict, Creating Peace. And in that, in his book, and he talks about, you know, being in the eye of the storm, and it came up. And there's a quote that I found from Dr. Gary Simmons. He says, "As often as I can, when in the midst of strong emotions, I remember the perfect stillness that abides in the center of a hurricane. I become that, and spirit arises from somewhere deep to guide me to safer waters. As often as I can, when in the midst of strong emotions, I remember the perfect stillness that abides in the center of a hurricane. I become that, and spirit arises from somewhere deep to guide me to safe waters." So when we're in a strong storm of emotions, like, you know, being in our current world thing, you're reading the paper, pandemic, things are happening, you know, we can go within or listen to that God force within us. Perhaps it means going with the flow or staying right in that thing. Or, you know, like on our ship, we had to change, you know, get ready to go forward in it from the other side. So we were steaming ahead slowly and we made preparations, you know, and we can do that in our lives, steam ahead slowly and make preparations for the next change in consciousness. So today we looked at Myrtle Fillmore, her voice on habits, some information on habits and how they impact our lives personally, and how businesses are using these things of habits to impact us. And we did some Bible work on a story that emphasizes take up your bed and walk. Get out of your comfort zone and do something. And we had a metaphor about the eye of the storm and dealing with strong emotions by going into the calm within. So namaste, dear ones. Let's move into our period of meditative reflection. And I invite you to sit comfortably on your chair. Let your hands rest gently on your lap. Close your eyes or let your gaze be softly forward at the computer screen, which probably has my image on it right now. Bring our attention to our breath. Follow our next breath as it goes up through our nasal passages, down our trachea, down into our lungs. And we hold our attention around our heart center there, allowing our breath and breathing to be normal and relaxed at whatever pace it needs to be. And as we keep our attention on our heart center, perhaps we can feel the beating of our heart. Our heart, that wonderful physical organ that sends blood to each and every part and cell of our being. And it's also the symbol of love in our culture. So if there's any part of our body temple that needs that healing hand of spirit, imagine seeing love-filled, spirit-filled blood flowing from our heart center out to that part of our body temple that needs the healing hand of spirit. That healing hand of spirit that can say to that body part, take up your bed and walk. Or like Myrtle did, praising her body, praising that part of our body and being grateful for all the wonderful work it's done for us in our lives. And if there's any person, place, thing, or event in our life that needs that healing hand of spirit, I invite you to see it clearly in your mind's eye. And see that person, that place, that thing, that event enveloped in a blue-white light bubble of healing, spirit-filled energy, bringing about healing, wholeness, and at the right and perfect time and in the right and perfect way. And we bring our attention back to our heart center, keep it down on our heart center. And Jesus of Nazareth, when asked by his disciples, saying, Lord, teach us how to pray, he told them to go within to the closet of their being. And the Father, which hears in secret, speaks in a small, still voice. So we go down into the closet of our being, our heart center. And we keep our attention focused on our heart center. And as we listen in the quiet and the silence for a small, still voice to apparently speak to us, or thoughts coming across our mind, or some images flashing across the screen of our mind, we'll take a few minutes in the silence as I ring our chimes 3 times. We'll go into this brief period of silence and meditation. And now we bring our awareness back to our physical body temple. We become aware of the pressure of our feet on the floor, the pressure of our body against our chair or wherever we're seated. And perhaps during our time of silence, something like a small, still voice spoke to us, or thoughts floated across our mind, or images floated across the screen of our mind, or perhaps not. But we have made ourselves available to Spirit. And perhaps later today, in a conversation with a friend, an email, a movie we're watching, a book we're reading, Spirit will unfold whatever message that Spirit has for you to do as we move forward and we take up our bed and walk. Namaste, dear ones. It's been great being with you. As we move forward into this week, and the month of August is ending and the month of September is going, our years marching on, let us reflect upon any negative habits we may have in our lives and look to that Christ within to make any change that may be speaking to us to take up that bed and walk. Namaste.